Hello, it's Howard Reingold. Hi, it's Howard Reingold, and we're talking with George Siemens here about MOOCs. So, George, what's a MOOC?
Well, a MOOC is currently described as a massive open online course. And basically, it's an open course that's delivered online. There's no requirements for, prerequisites for people to join. No concerns with active engagement. Everything is open. Anyone can access at any time.
So what are the elements?
Sorry, what are the
elements?
Okay,
to it?
well, I'll give you, if you don't mind, maybe a little bit of background, which will help to define it a little bit better. It started in, I guess, about 2007. We ran an online conference, and then we used a variety of tools. We used synchronous tools such as Illuminate, and then we used Moodle as an interaction space, and I encouraged people to blog. We wanted, at that point, podcasts were big, so we stripped everything down to podcasts and ran it through iTunes. But when we got to 2008, and there's a few others, Ali Koros and David Wiley, that were running courses. We were doing conferences at that time. So in 2008, Stephen Downs and I decided, let's try and do an open course, which we were teaching at University of Manitoba, but let's open everything up. MIT made content available, and we wanted to make the entire instructional process available without fee, because really there's no additional costs to invite with the internet. The amplification, having 1,000 learners versus 20 learners, there's no additional costs for us as educators. So what we ended up doing is using Illuminate for live weekly sessions. We used the Daily, which is an email that's sent out. We aggregate blog posts from all course participants, and then we run a filter against those blog posts, and if they have the course tag in it, we include that in the daily email that gets sent out. We encourage people to create their own spaces. Our assumption was that educational institutions need to stop providing the spaces for learners to interact and now allow learners to bring their spaces with them, which means that they have an archive. So people were setting up spaces in Second Life. We had the course syllabus translated into about 5 different languages. We had 2,300 people sign up to join. And we basically let people do whatever they felt they wanted. If they wanted to engage in an alternative form or space, then we encouraged them to do it. We had one student from Israel that she didn't want to take it through credit at University of Manitoba, but she wanted recognition. So she took the course with us, but her instructor marked her activities. So we were the teachers, but her instructor was the evaluator. And so really the elements, best way to describe it is the elements were the internet. People did what they wanted to do.
Is there a set of common texts, readings, or videos that are the core of this?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, a bit of our mindset was that any course today starts, we wrap the social elements around the content. I mean, that's how traditional education is done, right? Here's your text, here's your readings, now talk about it. And our assumption was partly that we wanted to have these social interactions actually produce the content. Which doesn't mean that we just want them to run through open meadows learning randomly. We still started off each week with a set of readings. We had some literature that we wanted them to engage in, videos. We tried to keep everything open. The odd case, we had additional readings that were behind a closed journal, but those were optional. The video interactions then, we brought in guest speakers, so they would come in and do a 1-week session, and of course that served as an artifact for next iteration of the course. But the assumption we presented to the students was essentially the content isn't what you're supposed to master at the starting point. The content we provide you at the start should be the catalyst for you to converse, to form connections with other learners in the course, with other academics around the world, but to essentially use the content as a conduit for connections. Because once the course ends, then that learning experience typically in a university setting is done. It's stopped. And if you found it, if you're really passionate about it to a degree, the university severs those connections on your behalf. With the internet, those connections exist well past the course. Once you close the door to a physical classroom, that's it. the course is over. You might still have ongoing connections with a few, but the ability to activate those connections has a high cost, either in time and getting a hold of the faculty member and interrupting them. But if your colleagues are blogging, and if some of the individuals you met in the course, academics or others, are active on Twitter, are active on different social media platforms, you can continue to be involved and engaged. And I think that's probably the biggest thing we found, was a long trailing social interaction structure that was, and because we didn't own the space, the individuals owned their space and brought their interactions with them, we couldn't cut those connections when the course ended.
So let me, it sounds a little chaotic to people who aren't accustomed to it. So let me kind of recap what you've got here. You've got the Illuminate sessions, and Illuminate, for people who aren't familiar with it, allows people to stream audio and video, and a large number of people to take over the microphone when it's their turn. And then there's text chat, and you can push slides, and you can screen share. So there's a lot of real-time activity. In regard to Moodle, are you using like a message board, discussion board feature for that? What parts of Moodle, how does that part work?
Well, we're continuing to experiment with it. Moodle is still too centralized for us. And so this last course that we offered, just wrapped up a few weeks ago, we did away with Moodle completely. And because what we wanted to encourage learners to think about is that a networked course doesn't have a center. And Moodle is still too much of a center for us to feel fully comfortable with it. Now, to a degree, there are literacies and skills that people have to develop to learn to navigate a distributed social network and to gain the pieces of information, or the knowledge, if you will, that they want. But with Moodle, when we first did it, we had a central discussion forum, and that was just a space where each week would have a discussion topic and people would engage there. What we started doing this last time around was we used Grasshopper, which is a platform that Stephen Downes developed. And essentially Grasshopper is an RSS aggregation tool, for lack of a better word, that runs a filter against all of the posts incoming, and it includes Twitter, it includes bookmarks on Delicious, it includes blog posts, and it comes as a daily newsletter that's archived. But each individual component has the ability to be wrapped around in social dialogue. So if, let's say, you're involved in a course with us and you post a resource, then that resource that gets posted gets has the ability for you to dialogue around it. So rather than you having to move your social interaction from a really good blog post into a Moodle forum, we wanted to wrap it directly around the aggregation. Now, what we need to do in the future is actually have that social interaction feed directly back to the original post rather than sit only within Grasshopper. But still, the point is, what we're experimenting with is the dissolution of the boundaries that an institution controls that permit or inhibit learner interaction, and to have that exclusively under the control of the learner, and to begin to tie together these, I've used the term, to form a narrative of coherence through your social network as a sense-making guide, so that you find your way through these complex settings, but you still can achieve clear outcomes. So I think that's the critical challenge is you, and if you're doing this in higher education, you need outcomes. Because that's the language of a university. And so meeting those outcomes then can be done through a distributed way, through a distributed mean, but you still have targets. And I'm not aware of any research actually that says linear structure produces better outcomes than, more chaotic, meandering structure. Our intent, based on our theories of learning, is to argue that the experience of learning, making sense of that chaos, is actually the heart of the learning experience. But if an instructor makes sense of that chaos for you and gives you all the readings and sets the full path in place for you, then to a degree you're eviscerating the learner's experience, because now you've made sense of them and all you've told them is walk the path that I've formed. When it comes to complexity, I'm a big fan of letting learners hack their way through that path and getting the value of that learning experience and that sense-making process.
So you mentioned targets. Can you give us an example so that people have an idea of what you're talking about? This is such new territory here for a lot of people.
Sure. Let's say if you're taking use the language of traditional university courses. So you have learning outcomes, and these outcomes are defined as, at the conclusion of the course, the learner will be able to, describe a learning theory, will be able to implement an instructional design model in a, corporate development, learning and development setting. So we still very much have those kinds of targets, because we had a twofold focus in these courses. One is we have 4 credit students that are enrolled in a certificate program that I developed at University of Manitoba while I was there on emerging technologies for learning. So we still need those students they write some essays, they do some concept maps, they do a final presentation. And the targets that they achieve are basically the outcomes. And that's what they're paying for, and they're paying for the instructor feedback on those outcomes. The other students that take the course, their targets are self-defined, because they're not trying to meet a university platform or trying to meet the goals that I've set for them. So we had students that would come in for 1 week, fade for 2 or 3, come back later. We had students in second, third iterations of the course that would come back as faculty member, basically as faculty members, because they would serve an instructional role, saying, "Oh, I remember, when I was suffering through week 2 of this course, this is what I did," and suddenly they become sense-making agents that help, navigate or help learners navigate through the course. So targets are, for the university purposes, ones we've defined in order to make sure that they achieve the learning that the university needs to give them a credit for it. The ones that participate, the learners that participate openly, targets are their own. It's what they want to get out of the course.
So how is the relationship between the instructor and the student? You mentioned that there's instructor feedback. How does that work?
Well, the students that have paid to be part of the course, that are seeking credit, their feedback is done in the form of comments on essays that they submit. There's, for example, learner artifacts that they produce, a video that they might do at the end to describe how they understand the course content, or an animation or whatever they do, so that they receive grading on as well as feedback. The other students, they receive feedback from peers. Now, when you have 2,000 students, for example, you have a rich pool to draw from. And what we try to encourage is the sense, it's not quite sure if I would call it a gift economy, but to a degree it is a comment gift economy, right? Like, if you want people to comment on your blog, the best way to get that to happen is to comment on theirs, right? To engage with them. And that recognition of this sort of reciprocal relationship, you give and others give back for your learning, is quite prominent. But I'll give you one illustration. One of the participants in the first course was Wendy Drexler, and she did a video called The Connected Learner, and I think it's had almost 100,000 hits now on YouTube. So the experience of feedback for her, I think, knowing that 100,000 people have seen her video, that she's had a lot of comments from people on different blogs about that video, I expect that's far more valuable than the particular grade that I gave her on that video when she concluded the course. So there's a real sense in which we still recognize that the instructor has an area of expertise, and that the instructor can provide comment based on her or his level of expertise. But in the long run, it's this broader social network that we participate in that validates us and validates our learning.
You mentioned 2,000. So you've had as many as 2,000 people in one of these?
We've had 2,300. We've done a variety of topics. The connectivism and connective knowledge has been the one we've done most often. We've done 3 iterations, and we've had 2,300, we've had 1,700, and we just finished off another one with 1,100. We did another one on the future of education, and we capped it at 750. We've done one on digital literacies. We finished one on personal learning environments and networks last fall, and I think we had 1,800 in that one. We have one coming up in fall this year that's actually going to be quite a different format. We've invited I think we were expecting about 25 faculty members and theorists and thinkers, and we're giving them each a week. So instead of us doing all the facilitation, because keep in mind, what we're really trying to do is rebalance the power relationship in knowledge so that the learners recognize that the power is based on the connections they form, not on the established connections that the faculty member has created. So we want to introduce them to a broad range of thinkers, and each individual will run their own week. Coincidentally, not to put you on the spot, Howard, but we would love to have you randomly engage in a week's activity, and our intent intent is basically to have an individual run a week with this large group of students, and students will shift from week to a new facilitator. And it's the process of engaging with both the facilitator, but also with the other students in the course and the networks that they form as a result that we're trying to provide as the value point of the course. The content as a conduit to connections is again, I keep emphasizing that as a value point. So yeah, we've had fairly large numbers in the process. I would say we've had about, in the last couple of years, over 10,000 participants that we've interacted with in these courses.
Wow. No, of course, at some time I'd love to do this. Let's schedule it.
I'll follow up with you because I think it'd be great to have you involved.
So I know that Illuminate allows you to record sessions. So do you have a library of recordings of these sessions? And how many people participate in an Illuminate session at one time?
Well, we've just started doing a better job over the last few years, or last few offerings, I should say, of tracking activity and applying analytics to the engagement of different learners in the course. So I would say we've had in Illuminate sessions as much as 150 to 200 people attend, but keep in mind these courses are very global, and to a degree the impact seems to be in areas that are areas where they might not typically have access to some of these learning opportunities, or you might not have the ability, if you're, let's say, located in Brazil or located in northern Canada, you might not be part of a social network that gives you the learning that you need. In your case, I mean, where you're located, you're located on the technical and, to some degree, the internet intellectual hub of the world, right? So in your case, you have ready access to learning opportunities. You can go to, University of California and attend a public lecture, but not everyone has that. So if you're remotely located, that's a big opportunity. So that's where we're seeing the greatest level of participation. So even if we have, let's say, 50 people that attend an Illuminate session, we'll typically, early on when we were tracking this, the archive usage, we would have about 10 times that amount hitting the archives because of different time zones. These courses are global. I think the first course we had just over 50 countries represented, and that means that if you schedule something at your time that's convenient for you, chances are you've isolated 50% of your audience or your participants because they're located in Australia or in Africa or in China. So that's been generally the experience that we've had in terms of participation.
So what do you foresee for the future of this? When you started out doing this, and once you get into doing something, you begin to see possibilities. Where would you like to go with this next?
It's a great question, and it really gets at the heart of what our experimentation is. And keep in mind, our mindset has been that when you engage in a new idea, you're not thinking about it in terms of, is it scalable? Can we implement this everywhere? You're really thinking about it, what's possible? What can I do? And the internet gives people an awful lot of new things to do. And it really challenges existing notions of a classroom, and it challenges existing mindsets of what, do we need a one faculty member for 200 or 300 introduction to psychology students at university? Or should we encourage students to really broaden their networks and to get a 1 week learning session with an expert on a topic from Austria and someone else from South Africa and someone else from Brazil, and to learning to think as a global participant, recognizing that the knowledge that you need to learn a complex subject matter is not going to be contained in one individual, and it's not going to be contained in one institution likely. It's going to be distributed. And as a result of that distribution, we need to design a distributed learning model. Now, I don't know how that'll apply to traditional universities. Does this mean that we start to rethink the role of a faculty member and start to treat them more like a global faculty member rather than a local faculty member? I'd have no idea what the economics of that would be like. But I think our intent still is, for now at least, before we start considering more of the systemic implications of this, is quite simply to experiment with, this is a model of learning that allows, without dramatic additional costs, any existing educator to amplify and to influence a far larger group of people than they could if they were just dealing with that small group of individuals in their classrooms. You mentioned, asked about the archives, for Illuminate recordings. When you get up in front of a group of students in the university, or when any other faculty member does this, very limited costs to stream that. You could open up Ustream and there you go. You could set up a separate discussion forum and suddenly have a group of students from different parts of the world coming into your classroom, talking directly with your students. And those are the kinds of experiences that we want to see accelerated, because a complex subject matter can't be cognitively apprehended the same way that a linearly structured area of knowledge is. So when you engage this complex knowledge, there's two principles that I keep emphasizing. One is this notion of wayfinding, right? That we find our way through these spaces through engagement with the ideas and the concept and other peers. The educator can be a contributing guide. So that's the one, the wayfinding component. The second is this notion of social sense making. And, when you think of it, SARS is probably the one example that I use most often. The discovery of the coronavirus as the cause of SARS wasn't done with a researcher or even a team of researchers in one physical location. It was Tokyo's lab would pass it off to Hong Kong, would pass it off to, different location would pass it off to Atlanta, would pass it off to Winnipeg. Literally as the night fell in different parts of the world, the data collected was passed on to the next area to work on. And that's complex knowledge, right? It's distributed, it's networked, and if we recognize that's knowledge, then the obvious question becomes, and we're not quite there yet, is how do you frame an institution that can effectively help learners mirror their learning process with the actual point of knowledge?
Wow, this is great stuff, George. Thank you.
My pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.